Well, if this is your first episode of Highland League Weekly ever, you've picked a good one to start with. I'm Ryan Crowell. I'm joined by our experts Callum Law and Paul Third. The Breedon Highland League title race for season 2023-24 is over. As you've seen, Buckie Thistle are the champions. Callum, before we get onto the game itself, you've got to say Buckie deserve it. 2 near misses in the last couple of seasons, and the finish they had to contest with this term. Loads of games in not very many days. Deserve it.
I think you're talking about previous seasons, and which I'll come on to, but at the end of the day, it's a 34-game league season. Table doesn't lie at the end of it. The best team always wins the league. There's no question about that. Buckie pipped on the last day in the last couple of seasons. I mean, 2 years ago against Fraserburgh, it was slightly different because it was never in Buckie's hands, but last year, obviously, it was decider on the last day against Brechin, which was, as some of the folk we spoke to afterwards touched on, was very sore. But to not maybe let that disappointment linger and to come back in the way they have this season and go again and win the league, they deserve a huge amount of credit. I mean, it's been a funny sort of season because obviously the points tally to win at 81's been, a bit lower than in previous seasons, but that probably shows the quality right across the league and how competitive it's been and some of the points that have been dropped. And for Buckie, I mean, you look at the issues they've had, like with the pitch issue they had with Victoria Park, playing games away from home, and they've sort of really, from December onwards, they've always been playing catch up, and it's always been the games in hand which they've had to play, and they've handled that well overall. I mean, their last 6 games, playing Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, to come through and win all 6 of them to win the league is a tremendous achievement. And wasn't it just a case of winning them either. Obviously, goal difference has been this thing all the way through, and you look at like that run of 6 games. I go back even to last weekend, scored twice against Devon Vale in stoppage time last Saturday, and they won the league by 2 on goal difference. Yeah. It's just shows you fine margins. And even midweek against Strathspey, and Ramsey scored, I think, with just about the last kick of the ball. It's like they've had a great ability to score late goals, maybe to win games or draw games over the last 2 or 3 seasons. But I think even in this run-in, when every goal has mattered, they've shown they'll keep going right to the finish. And they've, and again, like they always seem to do, they've netted a few really important late goals, which ultimately, when it's been such a close title race, I think it's made the difference.
You talk about the goal difference there. Obviously, the way it actually played out on Saturday, with Buckie, they score early, but then they just can't get another goal despite having loads of chances. And there's always a chance that then Keith then come up with a sucker punch. But Brechin as well, they get themselves ahead at Brora, and they get pegged back, which is probably like the big massive moment in the afternoon itself, because it like stops Brechin.
That relaxed everyone at Victoria Park, I can tell you, when news of that came through.
But like, I mean, it must have been so nervy for both the challenger or both title hopefuls on the day.
If you think back to last season, they were head to head in the final day. Really, I mean, that's what it was. It was winner takes all. This is a whole different thing because you're worrying about what's happening elsewhere, and you're always feeling like, well, it's not in our control. Yes, we're winning our game, but what's happening? Have they scored? Have they scored again?
Well, that's the point with Buckie a wee bit, is it's like, in the end it was, but it's like Gary Farker touching it, and it was that thing they could have beat Keith 1-0, and
lost
on another day it might still not have been enough. I mean, I would at this juncture, I think it's important to say as well, Keith, although the title race is the sort of big story, Keith, I think, deserve a lot of credit for the way they played, because with the way Buckie started and losing the early goal, you've seen it happen before where that could have been a bit of a steamroller, but it wasn't. Keith stood up really well. They competed really well for 90 minutes. They were never out of the game. I think, as Craig Ewan touched on, the only disappointment was that even especially the last half an hour, I felt they had spells, a wee bit of pressure where it maybe was nervy for Buckie, but they never quite had the cutting edge to really, create the decent chances which could have got something out of the game for them. But they performed well, and I think in terms of management, players committee as well, and the way they conducted themselves in the way when it was obviously a huge day for Buckie. I think Keith as a club as well should take a lot of pride and credit in that also.
You have to wonder how Brechin are feeling
I was
about
going to say,
it all.
before we come on to Buckie's next week ahead, which is still reasonably busy, reasonably, like maybe an understatement, but Brechin, yeah, I mean, in terms of the context of their season, they looked like the favourites for a long time. It must be a really sore one to not come away with the title.
Oh, it'll be devastating because let's be honest, they see themselves as an SPFL club in all but its stature, and the whole season is geared towards getting back. Brechin's whole season was geared towards, Buckie was winning the championship, which they've done. Anything that happens now is a bonus for them, I think, which we'll come to in a minute. But yeah, Brechin, and when you don't win it, you start looking back, going, well, why? What went wrong? And it'll be those head-to-heads with Fraserburgh. It'll be those head-to-heads with Buckie where they didn't pick up anything. A defeat, was it for Martin?
Mm-hmm. Well, you're touching on the big difference between the top two. Buckie this season against the other 4 teams that have finished in the top 5 from 8 games, 24 points. They've picked up 19 out of a possible 24. They beat Brechin home and away. They beat Fraserburgh home and away. Brechin, out of those possible 24, I think they picked up 7 points. They got 4 out of 6 against Banks of D, and they'll beat Fairmartin at home on the first day of the season. But then they've lost away to Fairmartin, lost home and away to Buckie and Fraserburgh. And I think personally, if you want to dwell over those games again, it's like the 2 Fraserburgh games. I think they deserve to lose both. The one recently in the wind, they were outplayed, no question about that for me. The 2 Buckie games at home, they lost a last-minute winner when a point probably would have been a good result for them. And away from home, they were 1-0 up at half-time in complete control and just got overrun. Really, they were second best by a long way in the second half of that game. And I think that's been the big thing a wee bit in terms of with the way it's panned out. They've been in control for a long time, but they've always just, at every opportunity where it's felt like if Brechin go and win and draw this big game, they really take complete control or a firm grip on things, they've slipped up and they've let Buckie and Fraserburgh back in, and Buckie have punished them. I mean, Gavin Price said you couldn't complain about the goal difference, but I do think really, we can talk about the head-to-heads, which is one thing, but if you look at the season as well, I do think this week, bottom line, they haven't done enough. For all you can talk about games earlier, a Keith on Tuesday, again, credit to Keith, against top 2, they've played very well this week, but against Keith on Tuesday, I thought Brechin, in terms of when it was coming down to goals, they didn't do enough for me in terms of creating chances, and the tempo and the intensity I thought was lacking a wee bit for them in that game. And even on Saturday, you look at the chances they've had in the game, and the goal they lose, they could also have had a penalty late on right enough, and the goal they lose, I mean, 99 times out of 100, I think Ewan Spark just puts his foot through that and puts it out the park. They lose a poor goal. They've missed a lot of chances. I just think this, you can say over a whole season, but when it's come down to this last week, I don't think they've done enough. I was going to say as well with that game, some interesting referee. Josh Meekins' dissent. Okay. I've been told that, which Brora will maybe say, can Dan McFarlane, the referee's overreacted, but I would also say for somebody with Josh Meekins' experience in the game to be sent off for dissent in a big game like that on Saturday is pretty poor for someone who's done what he has in the game. I do also think the red card at the end, when you see it back, it's probably a bit of an overreaction. Grady McGrath can understand, he just pushes Logan Ross wanting the ball because Brechin were needing to try and score, but referees made his decision, but I did think it was 2 probably avoidable red cards, all things considered.
The last thing I'd add about Brechin, and Callum just mentioned his name there, Grady McGrath. Now we're talking about a season where Brechin have lost out in the championship, and by virtue of goal difference. Well, they went a long sequence. It must have been about 6 weeks or so where Grady McGrath was practically on the bench every game. And that's the leading goal scorer, isn't he? In the division, it's remarkable. And you wonder, looking back, Brechin fans will be looking at that thinking, that's our main man, that's our main striker. What's happened there? That's maybe questions that they'll need to reflect on and come up with an answer themselves in the future.
I think with the goal thing as well, it's like you speak to other people in the league about how it's panned out, and I think there's sort of a contrasting feeling a wee bit in terms of some people have said to me the likes of Buckie are if a team really needs to rack up the goal, well, there's another team did it on Saturday that we'll come on to, but if a team really needs to rack up the goals out of Buckie and Brechin, Buckie's a team maybe with the way they play where they can really go after you and score more goals, and then Brechin's probably a team who might beat you like 1-2 or 3-0, but they'll have more control of the game and probably keep the back door shut and not really give you a chance going the other way, whereas Buckie maybe the potential to blow you away more, but they maybe also in trying to do that give you a chance at the other end. And I think that's maybe in the way it's panned out, probably it's easy to say now, but maybe borne out a wee bit as well in terms of like you look at some of the games where Buckie have kept the foot down and got extra goals here and there when maybe other teams haven't. That's perhaps the difference.
Right. We'll go on to Buckie's week ahead next. So, straight in the Shire Cup final, the Evening Express Aberdeenshire Cup final, on Tuesday against Locos at Keith. Then they've got their Pyramid Playoff first leg against East Kilbride away on Saturday. I mean, at this point, how do you think Buckie will be feeling again about the Shire Cup final? Well, they'll be desperate to add to their silverware because, I mean, you know, like buses will be the hope for Buckie. And how do you think they're feeling about the potential for promotion to the SPFL?
Well, for me, two things. I mean, of course, they'll want to win the cup, first of all, on Tuesday, but how much is left in the tank, and I think that also applies for a playoff, because as Callum touched on, they've just played 6 matches in the last 2 weeks. That's going to take a toll at some point, and we're going up through the gears here where it's a cup final, then it's a playoff semi-final, away from home, first leg. All of this is going to be taxing for the Jags, I think. You have to say they're favourites against Inverurie Locos on Tuesday, but Locos
fresh must be like.
Look, Locos gave Buckie a very good game at Victoria Park not so long ago as well. Buckie needed a last-minute equaliser to get a draw out of that. I don't think in terms of the cup final, I don't think energy will be an issue. I think the run they've been on. I think if they had lost the league, maybe it's a different story in terms of you're just on such a downer. But I think when you're winning and you've just won a league and all the sort of euphoria, I personally don't think energy will be an issue at all for Buckie in the cup final, and it should be a good cup final. And it's one of those things you've seen teams like Saw Cove when they were in the league, Brora have been the same, Fraserburgh as well over the last 7, 8, 10 years. These teams, once you start picking up trophies, it can become a habit. Buckie, before now, it had been 7 years without a trophy. Again, I'm sure they'll be desperate. They've won the league, make it a double, and then try and keep racking up the silverware in the seasons to come. In terms of the playoff, I mean, I think it's going to be very hard because East Kilbride, looking at the squad they've got and from stories you maybe hear about the resources they've got, are clearly a pretty formidable outfit. But I think Buckie, I mean, you look at their record in the big games this season, they've shown that on their day they're certainly capable, so it should be quite an intriguing two-legged tie.
And of course it's East Kilbride that Buckie faced in the playoff semi-final when they won the championship
7
years ago. I covered the second leg down at K Park. It had been 2-2 at Victoria Park, where Buckie had been up 2-0 and then conceded 2 late goals, and then they lost the second leg 2-1 down there. So there wasn't much between them on the day. Obviously it's 7 years have passed, but I also saw, if it's interesting for me, because if Buckie were to go all the way and go up next season to League 2, it's not a bad division to be in, where you're going to have Elgin, potentially Peterhead, if they don't go up through the playoffs, you might have... Yeah?
Forfar will be in it.
Forfar as well. So it's, in terms of travelling distances, it's not that bad. A division for a season if you're going to have a crack at it.
Okay, well, as mentioned earlier on, there was another team, Callum also hinted at a few minutes ago. Fraserburgh also had a chance at winning the Breedon Highland League title at the weekend. All they could do was hope Brechin and Buckie lost. Buckie and Brechin lost and rack up the goals themselves. I mean, we saw they certainly racked up the goals. They've done their job from that point of view.
I think you have to give Fraserburgh great credit for that on Saturday, in terms of they were always the outsiders and you're needing everything to fall for them, but they went and made sure that if there was to be any slip-ups elsewhere, they were in a position to pounce, and they were thoroughly clinical. I mean, yeah, I think you also have to give them credit. Like, they've won their last 10 league games. They've sort of came from nowhere a wee bit when other teams have maybe faltered, and they've come right up and finished really strong, gone to the last day. First time, I believe, since the Second World War that you've had 3 teams who could win the league and on the last day, all playing their final games on the same day. So pretty remarkable season all round. And, you know, Fraserburgh played their part in making it that with the run they've put together. I think, like, when they reflect on their season overall, I've touched on it in previous weeks, maybe a couple of league games where they could have had more points than they did. I mean, there was draw at home at Clach, loss at Turriff, where they were in good positions in both those games. Even the Buckie game at Lossy, that they lost 1-0, a lot good chances second half. Away for the league as well, losing the Highland League Cup final and the semi-final of the Evening Express Aberdeenshire Cup to Buckie are probably 2 games that the Broch might say that those got away from us. But I mean, overall, they finished third again. They've taken it right to the wire. They've had another very good season. Strathspey, on the other hand, like the last 8 days of their season, Buckie twice, Fraserburgh twice, conceded, I think, 29 goals, scored 2. It's, you know, they're pretty, by this point, and we saw their team sheet with the trialists on it, pretty beleaguered. And it's, I mean, for whoever goes in there next, they will be in the Highland League again next season. There won't be a relegation playoff, but it's a big job to try and improve their fortunes for whoever comes in next.
One thing I'd add about Fraserburgh, I remember it was 8-0 at half-time, which really would have added to the tension that the 2 teams above them would have been feeling in their respective matches, because suddenly you're going, this is on it at Belsley. we need to win this.
I'd like to see how many attacks didn't end in goals.
Well, it's funny what you're saying, because I was at Victoria Park and everyone round about, and I was getting updates from the folk I had at the Brechin game, the Fraserburgh game, and the updates, and the whole first half, basically, my phone was just pinging with Fraserburgh goals, so everyone was aware of the situation.
Let's, before we move on from Fraserburgh, touch on Ryan Cowie. Emerged towards the end of the week that Ryan Cowie was playing his final game, or if he made an appearance, would be playing his final game for Fraserburgh, retiring at the end of the campaign due to a persistent knee problem. We've discussed him previously as being one of the biggest patter merchants in the Highland League, but I mean, great player as well.
Aye, well, what I was going to say, first of all, you're saying if he made an appearance on Saturday, because that was, I think, even Ryan being the team man that he is, I think that was up in the air for a wee bit, because I think if, you know, Fraserburgh had been needing 2 goals in the last 10 minutes to win the league, he was sort of said to Mark, you know, didn't put me on if you're chasing the league. But by the time he come on, obviously they'd scored the goals they needed, and I think they knew that elsewhere it wasn't going their way, so he was rightfully got on. I mean, I think if you were to talk about Ryan, just the words that I would say come to mind would be committed, dedicated, enthusiastic and upbeat. Like, I think he's one of these people, and I think he's been a great influence in that Fraserburgh dressing room in terms of, like, didn't matter what the sort of task facing them was or what the challenge was, he was you could have said to him, oh, we've got to do this, and he was going, right, just do it, just given his all for that team and that club and been part of this sort of great team they've had over his brother Mark's time as manager, but over probably the last 10 years, really, they've always had a good side, and he's been a big part of that. And I mean, knee injury that he keeps trying to come back from and getting setbacks has forced him to retire at the age of 32, which is pretty young overall, and a shame for Ryan and for Fraserburgh in that regard. But he's one of these people, I think it's like you speak to teammates of his and people at Fraserburgh, nobody has anything but good things to say about what he's done there and his influence. And it was spoken about a lot at the time, but you go back to when they won the league 2 years ago, it was the first proper season coming out of COVID, and basically everyone else in that squad said the reason Fraserburgh started that season so well and were so ready was because all throughout lockdown he was doing workouts on Zoom, and it seemed for a long time it seemed to be a case of whenever they were coming back they were going to be ready, and he was a huge part of that. And I mean, he's somebody on a personal level I've come to know quite well, and what I would say is the Highland League's full of good people, whether it's players, managers, coaches, committee, directors, fans, full of good people, and Ryan Cowie would be one of the very best people I've had the pleasure of meeting.
It's probably the most Highland League Weekly has come, well, closest we've come to making you cry for like the right reasons ever during the run. Anyway, let's move on and rattle through the other 4 games that took place on Saturday. Not all the teams yet have completed their fixtures for the campaign. Some other teams did at the weekend. We'll start with Wick Academy 1, Banks of D 1. That draw means that, well, I think it's now confirmed that Banks of D will finish 4th and as a result earn the final Challenge Cup spot for next season. Michael Phillipson's penalty had them in front early. Wick then levelled through Gordon McNabb. Late on, other big news from the afternoon was Davy Allen back on the pitch for Wick for the first time in, I think it was more than 2 years.
2 years, basically.
With a knee injury, after a knee injury. And then, I mean, he's got 2 more games. Wick have still got 2 games left to play, so could get even more minutes before the end of the season.
I think that seems to be the idea. I'll touch on Banks of D first of all. Finishing 4th, playing in the Challenge Cup for the first time next season is excellent from them. If you look at, I mean, last season with the points deduction thing's been spoken about plenty previously, but they won the Highland League Cup last season. They've won the Aberdeenshire Shield this season. They've finished 4th. Another very good season for them. I mean, you look at it, the funny thing is they've actually lost the fewest games. Any team in the division, they've only lost 4 league games, but 9 draws have been costly, and they've only finished 9 points off the top. So they've been in it for a long way, and they haven't been far away. But if you speak to people at Banks of D, they know where they've maybe just come up short this season. So I think next season you probably see them putting in a very strong challenge again. In terms of Wick, I mean, another very good point for them, and a very good performance again at home against these sides. Like you look at the run they've had second half of the season, they've beaten Buckie and Fraserburgh at Harmsworth, they've drawn with Brora, they've drawn with Banks of D, they were edged out narrowly by Brechin there, so they've had a very good run, especially at home. And I mean, Davy Allen ruptured his patellar tendon April 2022 against Inverurie at Harlow Park. He said long wait to come back, and seemed like, although it was only a cameo the last quarter an hour, it was back like the Davy Allen of old. Nearly set up a goal. Maybe on another day could have had a penalty from what we've heard. Like, seems like he was a nuisance like he always was. I mean, Gary Manson said after the game, over the last 15 years, he's been one of the best players in the Highland League, and I don't think anybody could disagree with that. And it's like, if things go well the last couple of games and you've got Davy Allen back potentially fully fit next season, that's a huge boost to Wick Academy.
Forest Mechanics 1, Turriff United 0. It's a win that moved Forest up a place in the league. Mark McLaughlin's late finish was the difference between the sides. I think it stands out to me about this result is Turriff. When you look at the league table, they're going to finish 9th. you think they, and just a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about them in terms of finishing 7th. A slow finish is kind of done for Turriff this season, hasn't it?
It has a wee bit, but it has still been a very good season overall for Turriff. I think they're better off than they were last year.
The best points total and highest position since 2017.
Which is not bad going. And remember, when you look at Turriff, it has been a start all over again with young players and a few old heads and build it back up.
Yep.
So it is heading in the right direction. The interesting bit for me is, can they kick on again from where they are now into next season? As for Forest, I don't know what to make of the Cancans. They had such a good start and then just hit the handbrake really. Like it was on for most of the season, just couldn't get going again. But obviously to get a win will be a very pleasing one, I'm sure.
Well, they finished with 2 wins. Like they beat Wick in midweek at Mossett, and then they've won again at home Saturday. So from what at times is with various things, with injuries and one thing or another, and disappointing runs here and there, has been a hard season for Forest. They've finished well, finished 14th on a high with 2 wins, which I think, like Steve McDonald said something I thought was quite interesting after the game. He said he was chuffed, like they weren't going to be celebrating finishing 14th, but he was chuffed for these players in terms of, again, they've got quite a young squad, and the effort they've put in over the season to finish on a high as it did, was pleasing. And not, I mean, you can maybe say, if you say it's deserved, it maybe sounds a bit cliched, but for what they put in and the challenges maybe had at times, it was nice to see for Forest that they could sort of end on a high.
Denville 0, for Martin United 3. Julian Wade, Adam Emsley and Scott Lyle with first half goals in that one. Julian Wade and Emsley, again, names we've been hearing all season long in this programme. But reflections on Martin's season now, all is said and done for them. I mean, 5th place, will Martin be happy with that?
I think happy, I would say probably more satisfied. I think where they're pleased is they've been in that, like if you look at the table, there's been a top 5 have broken away, and then you've got Huntly, Brora, Nairn, Turriff as a 4 below that. For Martin, have been in that top 5. They've taken points off all the sides above them, maybe in some occasions, like they're in front against Buckie and at home and in front against Fraserburgh, so they maybe could have had more points actually, but they have shown on their day to be a very good competitive side to carry a threat clearly. I think areas that's maybe let them down, every team has injuries, but they have had important players. Rhys Thomas, I would think, especially being one, important players missing for long spells. And then also I think you've still got to go back to, like, even last summer they lost like Mark Gallagher, who I think people at Martin felt who's probably their best player last season. They lost him, and they lost Tyler Makita at sort of quite short notice to Cove Rangers full-time football. Got Dylan Lobban in on loan for Aberdeen to sort of fill that hole in the middle of the park. He was recalled and moved on to Scottish League in January. So, a couple of those players, maybe if they'd had them, might have pushed on a wee bit more. But I do still think they've had a good season, and I think again next season you'd certainly be looking at Martin as one of the teams in and around things at the top end. Devon Vale's interesting as well, because I think it was quite a flat end by all accounts of the season for them, but Grant Noble and Graham Watt have come in, done well. Tricky run of 6 games to finish in charge. They've taken 6 points, and I think the feeling I get around the Bamfors is if Grant Noble wants to be Devon Vale manager on a permanent basis, then I think he would get the job, but he's got quite a lot going on away from football as well. So I think really in terms of what they do going forward, it's up to Grant whether he wants it or whether he doesn't.
Okay, well, we'll finish then this Highland League Weekly regular episode, farewell episode, is that fair enough, with a game of farewells. Clattenacudden 2, Lossiemouth 0. George Robston's brace, the difference in this one. Seems like he's had a decent season for them on loan from Ross County.
He was at Nairn, but he was sent back.
Sorry, you're right. Anyway, wouldn't be Highland League Weekly without finishing the mistake.
He went back, and then Clark have got him, and he was injured, but he's kind of had that late season impact.
The headline from this, obviously, Martin Callan playing his last game for Clark. Derek Aris, their goalie coach. It is Aris, by the way. I'm not just putting on a Cockney accent. They're leaving the club. Frank McGettrick, he also, we discovered yesterday, or did we discover on Saturday? After the game that he's leaving Lossiemouth after just one season in charge there due to impending knee surgery. I think he's suggesting he's only going to be taking a season out. How do you reflect on both of those sides' campaigns? Are they finished? Are they both finished?
They're both finished, yes. You're saying farewells, there were also hellos as well, because Clark, I think they've a few more on the way, but Alan McPhee signed after the game. Good player previously, been with Clark and Forest, most recently at Loch Ness. Good Highland League experience, only 26. Live wire sort of forward player, so that on paper looks a good signing for Clark going forward. In terms of players leaving or people leaving Clark, like Martin Callum, somebody I know reasonably well as well, and like 13 years service as player and latterly player coach to the Lily Whites. Testimonial just last Wednesday against Elgin. Again, dedicated, similar to what I said about Ryan Cowie, but in terms of commitment and enthusiasm and sort of what he's done for that club, just a great stalwart. Clark aren't a club that's been blessed with having a huge amount of success recently, but he was part of their last trophy winning team 2014, the League Cup, and just a real legend of the Lily Whites. Derek Aris, somebody I don't know as well, I have to confess, but again, somebody else who's put a lot of time and effort into his role at that club and deserves all the plaudits I'm sure he's been getting, and again, good for them to leave on a high. With Lossie, with Frank, first thing I would say about Frank is a good manager and a good coach, but also an absolute gentleman to on and off the pitch to deal with. He's gone in there and done a good job at Lossie, 2 points better off than last season. Again, they've been unlucky with injuries like Bailey Campbell, Ross Elliott, who would have been two important attackers for them, have missed all season. Ryan Facher's missed the latter part of the season as well. So I think Frank's done well, and it probably shows his approach that he's got this surgery coming up, and he thought with the recovery time he would miss part of pre-season and maybe the start of next season, and he's either 100% all in or he won't do it. And Frank felt that with this coming up he wouldn't be able to commit the time necessary next season, so he stepped away, which I think says a lot about him as well. In terms of where Lossie going forward, I'm not entirely sure. They're fortunate they've got like Ian Campbell, Scott Campbell, Tony Ross. There's a coach and staff there who are sort of Lossie through and through, who I'm sure will be around and continue to hold the fort. But in terms of unless those guys take it, in terms of who they maybe go for as a next permanent manager, I'm not 100% sure, but it's for probably somebody local to the Lossie Elgin area, it's quite a decent job.
Right, we'll have to wait and see, but let's have a look at the final, well, the Breedon, not final yet, but the Breedon Highland League standings as they are now following the conclusion of the title race. Well, that's it then for the final regular Highland League Weekly episode of season 2023-24, our third season. Time flies when you are having fun. But we will, I think, have two more Highland League Weekly extra episodes to come. On Tuesday night, we're going to be filming the Evening Express Aberdeenshire Cup final between Buckie Thistle and Inverurie Locos at Kyning Park, Keith. And we're expecting to have two games filmed this coming weekend as well, including Brora Rangers playing who at Goldsmith?
Turriff United,
Turriff United.
And Keith against Wick Academy at Kynech Park to bring down the curtain rather on the season.
Okay, highlights of them next Monday then, in theory, so keep an eye out for those. Until we see you next season, please sign up to our Highland League newsletters. There's a link to do that below this video, and that will get you all of the latest off-season juicy Highland League news from the Press and Journal, provided by Callum, more than likely, I imagine. You can also keep up to date with all things Highland League Weekly by signing up, following or joining our various social media pages. We're on X at Highland LW. We're also on Facebook. Highland League Weekly is the name of the group. We're also on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok as well, I believe. Is that correct? Yeah, that's correct. But yes, until we see you next, I hope you've enjoyed this season of Highland League Weekly. We certainly have. And enjoy the football, whichever games you're watching between now and when we see you next.